Just a little tip for you guys, if you're looking at how to adjust your chain and it's already too tight and you can't go forward anymore, it's because Taos gave you a bike with the wrong chain. So my Tbr7 is just over 1100 kilometers and now I'm going to adjust the chain. And I'm going to show you guys how to do that. So if you already know how to adjust your chain, you're probably just going to skip over this video, and that's cool. But I think a lot of people are having trouble with their Chinese bike chains. I covered it in one of my earlier videos where when I bought the bike brand new, the chain was too tight to begin with. The rear tire was all the way forward. And in the Taos manual it says 20 to 30 millimeters of slack, and that's measured like this. So here in the Taos manual it explains the drive chain slack if you guys don't understand what I'm saying. So you find this point in your chain in the middle on the lower, and you want 20 to 30 millimeters of movement. Movement by hand, 20 to 30 millimeters vertical. Your motorcycle chain should only be removed or replaced by your Taos motor dealer. My Taos motor dealer gave it to me with the chain that was not the right size, so, you know, don't listen to those guys. Get the kickstand out of the way so you can see. I can't see if you can see because of the sun. So we have our calipers set at 30 millimeters. So that's 30 millimeters of movement, and we're going to see if I can show you on the camera here. We're probably over now, that's why I want to adjust it. So if the bottom of the chain gets past the top caliper, then that's more slack than we want. We're pretty much right on 30 millimeters, but we're going to go a little better. We'd like to get that down to 20 millimeters. So to adjust your chain, you don't need too many tools. I'm just going to use this multi-tool and this multi-tool. And you'll put one on this side to hold your axle bolt. And you go over to the other side, put one on here, and you'll loosen this up. And then once you get that free, you'll be able to adjust these nuts. And we'll go through and I'll show you. I've probably over-tightened my axles for sure. Plenty loose there. We probably went looser than we even needed to. So what you're going to want to do is measure these on each side, and you don't need calipers. You can use a tape measure or anything really. And you want it to be even so that way your wheel's traveling straight. And you can do it by looking at it pretty good by eye. So now I have it lined up pretty much where I want it, as good as I'm going to get really. So this side is that far apart and we won't move it, we'll just go to our other side here. This side might be a little bit longer, but very little. And I'm pretty happy with the way it is now. I will go ahead and go to 30 millimeters and check slack. That's almost 20 millimeters of slack, so we'll call it 15. And once you have your slack adjusted where you're happy, just go ahead and repeat the process and tighten the axle bolt back up. So we got the chain adjusted, and I keep the tools in my backpack to adjust the chain, because when you go on long rides, you never want to be stranded with a loose chain. So now we can get back to making our chain sliders, and I'll probably put that in one of the next videos. This isn't a normal part of my chain adjustment procedures, but I'm going to do it for a demonstration, and I've done it in one other video when I talked about how Taos shipped me the bike with the chain that's too short. If you unbolt the rear shock and pivot that in, you can pivot the swing arm all the way up and down, and you can see how the chain moves. And the chain will hit a tight spot, probably, I don't know in exact degrees to tell you, but probably right about where my fingers are. It's not going to be all the way up, and it's not going to be all the way down, but there is a tight spot there, just because of the way the swing arm mounts and the sprocket is ahead of it. So your pivot point isn't right here for the chain, it's right here. So as it goes up and down, it gets tight and binds up. So if your chain's too tight, then it binds up, and that's when you break your sprocket bolts, and I've seen hubs crack, the casting on the hubs. So right now I think I have my chain properly adjusted, so I should be able to unbolt the rear shock and then get full pivot of the swing arm without any issues. So I'm going to grab the tools, we'll loosen the rear shock, I'll pivot that forward, and then we'll be able to move the swing arm up and down, and I'll show you if the chain's too tight or too loose. I think it should be good. We've got a little bit of slack now. It was tight when I went to the parts store, but it loosens up a lot. Once you take the nut off the other side, just sort of wiggle your swing arm up and down and pull the bolt at the same time. And when you find the loose point, it'll come out. It's a little bit of a pain with the chain in the way, but you know, that's the difference. I was making sure the shock wasn't holding the swing arm from pushing up all the way, and I'm pretty sure the first time I did this test I was able to stuff it up into the fender. Pretty sure it hit the fender or the muffler, and I was just trying to figure out what is causing the swing arm to stop going up. And if you look right here, these little nicks, that's where it's hitting this bar. So I jump up and look on the other side to see if the swing arm is hitting when I lift it up on these little metal foot pegs. So I'm lifting the swing arm with, but on this side it's this little clip here that's hitting on this bar. See that? That's stuffed right up into the foot peg. Pull out on that top corner of the guard a little bit, and as soon as I do that, my swing arm has much more clearance. It's still hitting on the other side, so we're going to go fix that. That's much better. So be careful on your bike. If these are getting bent in, you might be limiting your swing arm travel. Now it'll stuff all the way back up into the fender like before. I knew something was wrong. So we're going to pull the chain guard off just to make it easier to see for demonstration. So you're loose when your wheel's all the way up, and as it goes down it gets tighter, and then you hit this tension spot where it's really tight. That's really probably as tight as you want it right there, and then back down and you're loose again. So maybe this helps explain why the manual says you want 20 to 30 millimeters of slack down here at the bottom in resting position, because when you go up and then you hit that really tight spot, there's not going to be as much slack, and then there's more when you get to the top. So you need to have enough slack adjusted in so that when you hit that tight spot and swing arm pivot, that your chain doesn't bind up and snap your bolts back here, because that's what's happening, I'm pretty sure. So to give you an idea what's happening at the front of the bike when your swing arm's pivoting, if you look at the chain, it's sitting on the chain slider during the resting position, and then as your wheel's going up, so when you're riding down the road with weight on the bike, maybe your chain's up a little bit like that. Maybe this is a better way to demonstrate the chain slack. So I have a tape measure now, and my camera tripod won't go any lower, so I'll just zoom in. And the bottom of the chain is about 4 inches. That's the line we're at. So when you move the chain up, we're getting about not quite 4 3/4. We can get 4 3/4 if we really stretch it. So I'm going to go ahead and say 3/4 of an inch is pretty much the same as 20 millimeters. So we're right at the low end of what the book says we want for chain slack. And you could see that when I was pivoting the swing arm up and down, that you don't want to be any tighter than this. So don't be afraid to have your chain running, you know, an inch of slack maybe, because that's probably where you should be. So you don't have to do the rear shock removal and the pivot test, but that's one way if you want to test and see if your chain's too tight. Do the pivot test, and if it binds up really tight, really bad, then you need to loosen your chain a little bit more, that's all. And I'm working on another thing that I'm going to make a video on replacement chain guide sliders. So the one that came with it was pretty junk. We're working on that. So that's all it takes to adjust your chain and get the proper chain slack so you don't damage your bike. So if you're new to the channel, check out the other videos and how-tos. And if your Taos came with a very short chain and the wheel is all the way adjusted forward, see the video that I linked below on replacing the Taos chain when it was brand new, because they're using the wrong one.